As promised in my previous video on USS Texas, I will be going over, briefly, what we know of her current repair process and what can be expected of the future. As things currently sit, we know more about the former than the latter, as her future is still relatively in flux until her dry docking is complete. Even so, what we do know is an interesting topic worthy of a video, so here we are. Most of the information here will come from both the Battleship Texas YouTube channel, which could always use more subscribers and viewers, make sure you check them out, and the accompanying website. That's about as first-hand as it gets for material on the Battleship. I will note, though, in advance, that the pictures on screen, a couple more public exceptions aside, will be historical images. There are many images of the dry docking on the Foundation's website. I chose to not yoink those without permission, so make sure you check out the link in the description if you want to see them. Right. First thing to make note of is that this is a long overdue process. I made a point in the previous video of how bad Texas was listing at times, or the fact she was so rusted out that a dry berthing was impossible. That is not the kind of repair that can be done sitting in San Jacinto, so a dry docking was basically as mandatory now as it was in the 80s, if not more so. Filled to the brim with foam to counter leaking, which had gone to the point the ship might well have sunk at her moorings, Texas left her home on August 31st, 2022. This is the first time she's left since her last dry docking period, and also the last time she'll be at San Jacinto. The future will see where she ends up, but for the moment she was towed up to Galveston, Texas. There, the old battleship was placed in a floating dry dock for her much-needed and much overdue repairs. These repairs are, in many ways, more extensive than what she received in her last dry docking. What you need to keep in mind as I go into this is that with the need to replace her deck as well as clear out a lot of rusted out metal, the dry docking in the 80s couldn't do everything Texas needed. No dry docking of a museum ship has unlimited time or money, and one has to choose their battles. They have to decide what they can actually prioritize. As a direct result, at least in this instance, the torpedo blisters on Texas are going to be basically completely cut off and removed. In the 80s, they were just patched, and the first update video on the Battleship's YouTube channel shows where those patches from the 80s were actually located. Those are fine, externally anyway. The issue comes in the fact that ships tend to rust from the inside out, provided they have a good anti-rust coating. Texas has that, but she also has very leaky torpedo blisters. This was not actually a bad thing when she was in service and routinely dry docked for maintenance. Torpedo blisters are, by their very nature, leaky. They're built lightly so they collapse and protect the actual hull if they get hit. Good for service, good for protecting against torpedoes, not so good for long-term preservation when a ship is fully expected to be in the water for decades without moving. So those would continue leaking and rusting away the framework supporting the blisters against the original hull. This directly led to collapses of that framework and the blisters caving in, which would naturally cause even more water intrusion and even more rusting. This is the kind of thing that cascades over time and gets worse if it's not worked on. As such, the biggest single project in this particular repair period is replacing the blisters. Well, for the most part anyway. They aren't being one-to-one rebuilt. Torpedo blisters need to curve down towards the keel to protect the ship properly. And since Texas isn't exactly sailing out into U-boat country anymore, smaller blisters are perfectly fine. There's no need to protect her against torpedoes. So what is being done, instead of just recreating the original 1920s work, is building stronger and thicker blisters. Thicker steel plates and larger framing. These aren't torpedo blisters so much as they're just, well, blisters. These are being put in not to protect the ship from explosions, but to provide ballast and protect the original hull from water intrusion. As such, they're tougher construction and not intended to leak. And even if they did leak, to be substantially easier to drain out. This is a laborious process to be sure, but a very necessary one. If you check out the sources linked in the video description, you'll see just how rough this is. What is interesting, though, is as these come off, you can see the original hull for the first time since the 1920s. Considering just how badly rusted out the interior of the blisters were, the original hull beneath them is in remarkably good shape. Not to say perfect shape, but she's been around for a very, very long time, and no century-old metal will be in perfect shape. That Texas has as few holes as she does, that her plates are in as good a condition as they are, well, they built Texas good back in 1912, let's put it that way. You can even make out where the torpedo tubes used to be before those were removed in the 1920s. Past the torpedo blisters, the rest of the hull is also examined and fixed up as necessary. New plates are being welded in, and holes are being patched where and when it's required. This is a process that requires a lot of work going into it, going over the hull and identifying where repairs are needed. That will probably take more time than actually putting the new plates in, since you have to painstakingly measure the thickness of the plates and figure out where certain repairs are needed. You need to figure out where you need to put new plates in, where you need to reinforce existing plates, or where you can just weld in some holes. As one example, the aft trim tanks. One of those was so leaky for her entire career that Texas was basically falling apart there, to the point that workers had to weld new frames against the old ones when she was still in the water, just to keep it from collapsing. Past these desperately needed hull repairs, though, you start getting into more detail work. Her deck is being cleaned up, and her smaller guns are receiving much needed cleaning and repainting. One of the 3-inch guns is actually from 1919, which is just fascinating to think about. All this being said, though, we're now reaching the end of what they've publicly posted. It's entirely probable that more repairs will be needed as the dry docking proceeds. However, without any firm knowledge of that, and frankly I doubt even the Foundation knows for sure as they'll find new things to work on, I'm going to end things here. Similarly, per what I've found, the future of the battleship remains uncertain. Insofar as, when she's back in the water, it's still an open question of where she'll end up. Baytown, Beaumont, Galveston, they've all expressed interest in having Texas. Considering the reason she's leaving San Jacinto is due to visitors declining, well, I for one hope that they think long and hard on where to place her for the future. As someone not a Texan, I make no judgment on where the best place would be. I only hope that she is placed where she can tell her story for many, many more years to come. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, most of the information here is publicly available on the Battleship Texas Foundation website and attendant YouTube channel. Both will be linked in the description if you want more detailed information on what is being done, including images of what work is being done. I largely avoided taking pictures, as previously mentioned, from that website in favor of images more publicly available for a reason. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you in the next one.